Welcome to The Rest of the Moose,
Where's the rest of this moose?
a podcast about anything and everything.
You must have hated this moose.
Here's your host, Chris Grum.
I'm often asked if I miss my radio days and being on the air every single day. And the answer is, from the point of view of being a DJ, yeah, I miss that a lot. It was a lot of fun. But behind the scenes, there were a lot of things we had to put up with, especially in the later days. But there were times in radio that you just shook your head and you went, are you kidding me? And it was those things that you go, come on. Our life's hard enough. We're under a lot of pressure to deliver every single day. And by the way, back when I started, live, not on tape, no safety net. You were live 24/7. And, you know, we screwed up. Let's admit it, but you didn't want to. But there were times where throughout my career, I worked with people that you just scratched your head and you kind of went, okay, how did you get out of bed in the morning? Or how do you tie your shoes? Because some of the things that they said to us were just absolutely crazy. And in fact, earlier today, I was reacting to an old radio friend's Facebook post, and it reminded me of a couple of radio stories that I'll tell. And I'm not going to name names. Those of you that know will know who they are. And if you don't, you're better off not knowing. Let me just put it that way. But I'll give you two examples of times where I was scratching my head in radio. And this may turn into a much longer post than I intended. And there may be a sequel to this because there's dozens of these stories. But the post that I wrote today was somebody talking about somebody had come to their house and stolen a light bulb of all things. And they said, who in the world would do that? Why would they do that to us? And my response was, this is somebody getting you back for mispronouncing Kirkendall all these years. And for those of you that are not in the Houston area, Kirkendall, which is Kuykendahl or LL, depending on how you want to spell it, is a street here in Houston. And it is pronounced Kirkendall. And maybe it's not originally supposed to be pronounced that way, but 99 out of 99 people in Houston, I should say probably 100 out of 100, will say Kirkendall. That's what you'll hear in traffic reports. You hear on television. If there was somebody shot in a house on Kirkendall, that's what you're going to hear. But we had one person who was in management at our radio station at one point here in Houston who sent us a memo to tell us all we were pronouncing it wrong, that it should have been pronounced Kuykendahl. Now, I will tell you, as someone who has worked all over the country in radio, the last thing you want to do is go on the air in any particular city and pronounce a road or a city or a town wrong, because they're going to know immediately you ain't from around these parts. And I'll give you an example. When I worked in Boston, there's certain cities, Quincy. Most of the country would say Quincy, but it's Quincy. I know it's a small little difference, but it made a difference to the locals. Worcester. Most people would probably say Worcester. It's Worcester. And yeah, you got to have that Boston accent in there. Get the I in there. Worcester. Leicester is Leicester. Peabody. Most of the country would say Peabody. It's Peabody. You have to know those little things, because the minute you say Peabody on the air, people know you ain't from around there. In Houston, an example would be Humble up on the north side by the airport. It's Humble. But people from out of town, and when the Weather Channel tries to talk about it, it's Humble, Texas. But what's funny is then Texans say, well, you know, he's a really humble guy. No, he's humble. There's a difference there. We're not British. We don't have to drop every H. But I digress. Going back to the Kirkendall thing, what was funny about this was not only was he wrong in saying Kuykendahl, and maybe that was how it was pronounced back in the day, and maybe that's how it's supposed to be pronounced, but that's not how the locals say it, and not how anybody that wants to stay on the radio very long is going to say it. But what was even more ironic about this story, and that beyond the fact that he put it on paper for the whole world to see, was we had a guy on staff whose last name was Kirkendall. And guess how he pronounced it? The correct way, or at least the way that all of us do. But that was what was so amusing about that particular thing. We've got a guy right over here. That's his name. And he's trying to tell you how to pronounce it. But anyway, that was one of the times in radio that we just kind of went, really? This is the fight you want to battle and the hill you want to die on? We have so many other problems at the radio station, and we're going to worry about a word that we're all saying right anyway. Now, I will say, this guy and I almost got in a battle one time because when they were building Minute Maid Park downtown, and then they were going to build the Toyota Center next to it, we were kind of all saying, well, wait a minute. How is it going to work when the Rockets and the Astros have a game at the same time? The traffic's going to be insane. And this same person said to us one time in a meeting, well, they'll just stagger the start times like they do on Broadway. None of the Broadway shows start at the same time. And I started to say something, and my program director, Debbie Brazier at the time, looked over at me and just kind of shook her head like, don't even bother. It's not worth it. And then after the meeting, she came up to me and she goes, I know how hard that was for you. I went, yeah, because he's wrong. All the Broadway shows start at the same time. I mean, maybe 30 minutes difference on a rare occasion, but on Friday night, it's 8 o'clock for everybody. And it was so funny that he used that example again as almost as wrong as with Kirkendall. So that's one story. That was back towards the end of my career. But I remember one from when I first started out. And this is just one of those things that makes you laugh and also makes you scratch your head. So when I started in radio, I started in 1985 and worked when I was in high school in the evenings and on the weekends. And it would have been around 87, I guess, when Dirty Dancing came out. And because my class song was Time of My Life in 1988. And so the movie came out in late 86, early 87. They released it once. It didn't do very well. And then the music from the soundtrack started playing on the radio. And then people got an interest in the movie and it became the phenomenon that it was. But at one point during that time frame, and I guess it would have been late 87, early 88, they released the song Time of My Life with Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes. Now, if you've seen the movie Dirty Dancing, you know that in the film, it's the song that ends the movie. And it's the final dance. And in the movie, it is probably in the neighborhood of 8.5 minutes long, if I remember correctly. It goes on and on and on and on and on because there's some dialogue here and there. And there's things that happen within that 8.5 minutes of wrapping up the film, right? Well, those of you that remember the radio version, it was right at 4.5 minutes. And that's the version that is also on the Dirty Dancing soundtrack. And the one that you hear whenever that song is played, you're going to hear the 4.5 minute version. So the song is out, and I believe at the time it was in the top 10, if not the number one song in the nation. And so back then, we played everything on what was called a cart. And it looked like, for those of you that have heard of these, an 8-track tape. It was a cartridge that was maybe 3 inches by 2 inches or 4 inches by 2 inches. And it would have one song or one commercial or one sound effect on it. So you had a whole wall of these things in the studio. And when you would start your next hour, you'd go and pull your 15 songs and stack them up. And you'd have your commercial stacked up. And you literally had to press a button every time you wanted to play one of these things. So the song Time of My Life was on a cart that ran about 5 minutes long. And so what would happen is the song would play, and then the cart would find its beginning again because it was an endless loop tape, and then it would stop and it would wait, and then when you played it again, it would be ready to play. And that's what radio stations used for many, many, many years. And in the late 80s, that was what the majority of them were doing. They weren't playing CDs yet. They were playing either records or they were playing it on a cart. Most were on carts. So in our studio, we had a cart that had Time of My Life, Bill Medley, Jennifer Warnes, and it's a 00 intro because it starts off with him singing right away. And then it's about a 4.5 minute song and it fades out, right? So I'm playing that song one night and the phone rings. Now, you have to understand, at the radio station, you have the regular request lines, which are the lines that the public has knowledge to, and they can call and make requests and play contests and so forth. Now, when you're a DJ, you don't always have time to answer those because you might be on another line or you might be working on something for the next break when you talk again. You might be pulling and putting away carts. Any number of things happen when you're doing your show, and so you don't always have time to answer the main request lines. So radio stations have what is called a hotline, and it's a phone number that is not publicized and is only shared by the staff, and usually only the radio air staff. Usually the people that work out in the office don't have this number. And it's a number designed specifically so that if the boss or one of the other DJs needs to reach you, they can call that number. It'll flash a specific light in the studio, And to answer that call right away, because otherwise they could sit on the request line for hours not getting answered. And so I'm playing this song, and the light flashes, and it's one of my bosses. And he says, "Hey, CJ," and that was my radio name was CJ Cook. And he says, "I just got out of the movie. What version of this song are you playing?" And I said, I'm playing the one that's here in the studio. That's been the same one we've always had. And he's like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sure." "Why?" And he says, "Well, I just got out of the movie a few minutes ago, and this sounds like a much edited version." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, because the one in the movie is like 8.5 minutes long. This is the one we've always played." And again, "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure." It's the same one we've always had. "Oh, okay. All right. Well, have a good night." And then phone hangs up. And I'm just thinking, what was that all about? I mean, I know there's a longer song in the movie, but you played this. And by the way, the boss was also a DJ on the radio station. So he played the same song and calls and asks me about it. So I'm just like, okay, whatever. He's having a senior moment. We'll let him move on. So then a few days later, I'm at a record store. And yes, they used to have record stores back in the day where you could go and pick up tapes and CDs and 45s and 33 and a third records and everything. And they had a thing called 12-inch records. Now, these were the full album-sized records, but they only had 1 or 2 songs on them. And usually they were remixes of songs, but for dance clubs and so forth. And so a 12-inch might have 6 different versions of the same song, one with more grooves and one with more instrumental and so on. So there was a song on the Dirty Dancing soundtrack called Yes by Mary Clayton. And I saw the 12-inch version of that sitting in one of the bins at the local record store in Lufkin, Texas. And I flip it over just to see what's on what that we call the B-side. And it says Time of My Life movie version, 8.5 minutes. And I went, well, looky here. So that night I knew I was going to be on the radio, and I knew I was going to play that song at some point. So I went up to the radio station. I found a cart that was 9 minutes long. I threw that 8.5 minute song onto a cart, and I put it over on the table next to me in the studio. And when it was time to play Time of My Life, I went on and said, "Oh, we got a special treat for you tonight. Here's the movie version." And I'm playing it, and it's going along, and we're about 4 minutes in, and the phone rings. The light's flashing. I'm like, oh, somebody's calling. And I answer, and it's the boss again. He says, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" I said, "Nothing. What's up?" He says, "Why are you playing this version?" And I said, "Well, because you asked about it last time." And he's like, "Yeah, but don't ever play any versions we don't play." So again, okay, no problem. So it got one airing on KFOX 95 back in Lufkin in 1987 or 88. But I thought it was amusing because this was a song he asked about, and we gave him that, and then he didn't want it. So, again, it's one of those things that makes you scratch your head. And I'll wrap up. I wasn't going to tell this story, but what the heck now? It doesn't really matter. This same boss was prone to writing memos about stuff. And he would write memos that didn't always get from point A to point B to point C eloquently, I guess is the best way to put it. And so Chris Love and Chris Love is a longtime dear friend of mine. You might pop up on one of these podcasts eventually, especially if we start talking about Star Trek at any point. But Chris Love worked with me at the radio station. His dad was the general manager and one of the owners. And when we were in high school and working together at the radio station, we were just a little bit of trouble at the station. Let's put it that way. So we would every once in a while write a memo from the boss, and not his dad, but the other boss. And they were joking memos. And you could tell that they were a gag because first of all, they were signed by another name that wasn't him. And we kind of made up a name that was similar, but not the same. But they were ridiculous. They were stupid things like, they just rambled. But I guess at some point, somebody on the staff took one of them seriously. So what we had found one weekend where we were working was there was this giant magic marker. And it was one of those magic markers that you can barely get your fingers around. And we were like, oh my God, Senor Magic Marker. So then I thought, oh, there's an idea. So we used to get memos that would say, hey, this weekend we're giving away this prize, or this weekend here's the schedule or whatever. So we took this magic marker taped it to the studio door with a memo from the boss that said, this weekend is a Senior Magic Marker weekend. Caller 12 all weekend long wins a Senior Magic Marker. Have fun with it, Well, anybody in their right mind, I don't care how cheap the radio station is, they ain't giving away magic markers. We can do better than that, folks. But we had one guy on the radio who went by the air name Michael K. Fox. And by the way, it was Michael K. Fox after Michael J. Fox, who was on Family Ties and Back to the Future at the time, obviously. But if you called him Michael K. Fox, which was the radio station, he would get mad at you. Anyway, it's another story for another time. Michael took it seriously and gave away on the radio a magic marker. That was on Sunday night. Now, I had my own phone line at home because I would do fill-in during the week from time to time. But at the time, I was only working weekends. And so Monday morning, I'm at school, and I get a voicemail. And when I get back to the house, it's the boss. And he says, give me a call. So I call him. It's Monday afternoon. And he just lets me have it because he knows I wrote the memo. And he says, you don't understand what you've cost this radio station. And I'm thinking, well, it's a magic marker. How much could it be? He gave away one of those, and now we have to pay for it. I'm like, I'll be happy to pay for it. That's not the point. And probably rightly so to a degree, I got my butt chewed. And then came the capper on the cake. And you're suspended for 5 days starting today. And I thought about it, and I went, okay, today's Monday. 5 days, including today, is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I don't work any of those 5 days. So you've just suspended me for 5 days that I don't work. So I was just going to let that go. He hangs up. And then on Wednesday, I get a phone call. I get home. It's the afternoon. It's about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I get a phone call, and it's the boss. Hey, CJ. Hi, how are you? Good. Hey, so-and-so's sick. Can you work tonight? I said, no, I'm suspended. What do you want me to do?
You've been listening to the Rest of the Moose podcast, hosted by Chris Grum.
Why don't you forget the moose for a moment?
Previous episodes are available online at chrisgrum.com. See you next time for the Rest of the Moose.